Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We are going back to that horrible world known as the JRC, but before we do, the usual disclaimers. Now, I am trying to do enough videos that I can technically take a break for a month without breaking that promise to the JRC to have a video up on their asses every single day. So you're probably going to see this a month from now. So any references that I make to tomorrow night has to do specifically with April the 10th, all right? All right, folks, if you are unfamiliar with the Stop the Shocks campaign or the campaign against the troubled teen industry, you're going to find all the pertinent links right there in the description box. Please, in particular, take note of the article written by NeuroClastic, a small non for profit started by autistics for autistics. In it, they interviewed over 900 ABA professionals in regards to the JRC's so called behavior modification program. The Judge Rotenberg Center doesn't want you to read that article so much. They threatened NeuroClastic with a defamation lawsuit if they did not remove it from the website. NeuroClastic refused. You know the drill, folks. Read the article, share it on all your social media. Also included in there is NeuroClastic's public statement regards to the defamation lawsuit threat, as well as a link to their GoFundMe. We are crowdfunding just in case the JRC actually sees through with their threat. Trigger warning 1 when we discuss places like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center and Agape Boarding School for Boys. You're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips of surveillance footage of people with mental health issues and disabled people being tortured and abused. If you got young children present, please make sure to utilize those headphones, all right? Trigger warning number 2, this channel is marked not for kids for a reason. We use profanity on occasion and speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and watching this, very obviously parental supervision is very much advised, alright? So going off to where we left off yesterday, to comment 25. Let's read this stupid, shall we? Mother of God. One comment objects to the FDA's reliance on the JRC's policy document listing. Well, we already talked about this. Sorry, moving on. We're moving to the response. Sorry. We don't have an edit button. FDA disagrees. The discussion of possible AEs from JRC included in its documents is consistent with the literature. No, we read this too. Again, we do not have an edit button, but screw it, we'll do it again. It also is consistent with the information identified and submitted to FDA by individuals formerly at JRC and their parents. So, in other words, what we already know medically about other similar devices that causes shock to the body to stop inappropriate behavior. It is very logical to conclude that a device that is pumping infinitely more electrical shocks through you is probably going to affect your heart. I'm glad we can side on the side of reason. Jesus. And I also do love the fact that they are mentioning not just that, but that the medical records, both behind what I am talking about here, as well as the students' medical records, that they volunteered up, waiving their HIPAA rights to do so, that information to the FDA. Remember when I said several videos back that any survivor story that can be backed up and corroborated by those on the professional side with medical actual documents are going to end up getting more weight. Even those folks who came forward with their stories who did not have handy the medical information to give, or whether they were trying to keep that information to themselves so the JRC can't use it as a means to attack them legally, If, however, their story matches up with the other survivors, in particular the stories of the survivors who did indeed provide such evidence and documentation, you are going to end up giving that more weight, logically, than another individual from the JRC side giving a very stunted testimonial with no data or medical evidence or documentation to back it up. That's why these two things don't weigh the same. You can go in there with no medical documentation and tell your survivor's story, and at the same time, if you're within a group of people who are all being abused by the same entity, and they have a story that is damn near identical to yours, but they had the medical documentation to back it up, your story, even though you did not provide documents, is going to be given more weight. Whereas the lone person by themselves doing what they have to, spare them the JRC's cruelty. Yeah, these things are not similar. What they're talking about in regards to, but in regards to NSAID though, but we contest the validity of the NSAID judgment. Nobody gives a shit if you challenge the NSAID ultimate conclusions, all right? Nobody gives two goddamn shits if you want to sit there and beat your chest and tear your hair out, screaming at the top of your lungs that the NSAID report is inaccurate. But the fact of the matter is, that's not what the evidence suggests. Okay? It is actually procedural for a department like the FDA. Once examining, going through, and marking the evidence in regards to NSAID's conclusions, that they're going to lean on their side as opposed to the person who's literally in the hot seat. Because they had the documentation and video surveillance footage to back up their findings. See, when we go in there, the group like that, or as we've said previously on the channel, the group of when things go wrong, we're not just going in there observing, writing notes, and publishing something. No. It's not how documentation on these types of accusations tend to work when we are allowed to do our jobs, unlike at the JRC or in the state of Massachusetts. It's backed up by photographs. Take photographs of what it is that we are seeing. We will confiscate if it is within our authority to be able to do so, and working through appropriate channels to confiscate video surveillance footage if we suspect that abuse is going on. We don't expect you just to sit there and take our word for it. We back it up. And NSAID didn't just have that, but remember, they talked to the parents as well as the students. They saw with their own eyes. They took photographs. They looked at the video surveillance footage. They weren't going in blind and just already predisposed to torment poor JRC. It's like dealing with AH, isn't it? Everybody's guilty but the JRC. But anyways, shall we read on? Specifically, NSAID received reports of AEs, which NSAID refers to as collateral effects, from the use of these devices, such as increases in aggression and increases in escape behaviors or emotional reactions. All of these are logical, folks, and before the JRC Kool-Aid drinkers start with the whole, but how can you say that they're qualified to do it? They literally have more letters behind their name than Dr. Matthew Israel ever has. When we come in these groups, we come as a collective group of professionals, each with our purpose and area in which we need this focus on. My participation in these groups in particular was to be the advocate of the consumer and the consumer only. My job was to promote their interests, their safety, and their health. It lied solely with the consumer and nobody else in the room. Simply put, my job was to make sure that the wishes of the consumer were made known, their concerns made known, and if they had a story, if something shady was going on, my department, again, all right, that was my job. Then you have the psychiatrists and psychologists that come along. Then usually this is in regards to when there is a specific service provider who is being investigated, or if it's a school, for example. They tend to go ahead and go along with the group. It's a little bit looser with group homes, at least it was in the mid 2000s. Things may have tightened up since then, but back during that time, things are a little bit looser when it's individual group homes that are being investigated instead of overall providers or school systems. But ultimately here, INSEAD came in with all the professionals that they needed to come in order to do that visit called when things go wrong, all right? These people are more than capable to be able to explain to you whether the collateral effects, if it's going to be aggression and retaliation. Now, you shouldn't necessarily need to have a doctor with so many letters behind their name to be able to determine that if somebody is threatening you violently, in particular putting you on a human shock collar, like a modern equivalent of the sword of Damocles, they're probably, as an after effect, going to become aggressive and might discover new behaviors that were never there in the first place. This is called common sense. But since we live in a situation where we literally have to make sure that those psychologists and psychiatrists are there, neurologists during such visits, and the reason we do so is because of this, because generally, folks, it's usually decided on the end of the service provider. Very rarely is it ever really decided on the end of the individual, unless the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. One of the jobs as an advocate wasn't just to see through their side. That was my primary role, but I also acted as a mediator between the consumer, the service provider, and the state. Okay? To work out a solution to whatever issue is going on. Now, when that conversation can't be had, then I have to come back with these folks and go over our findings and talk about what consequences are going to be and what needs to be done should the place need to be shut down to essentially replace into different, more healthy programs a large group of kids. In fact, in the mid 2000s, at the height of the closed institutions movement, when multiple institutions throughout the country were shut down, the massive workload that dropped on the shoulders of state workers. That I wanted those institutions closed down, but I also understood the reality of now that massive caseload has just gotten 3 times larger because I have to act as an advocate on the wishes of the consumer in order to determine, along with their team, what's going to be the best placement for them after coming out of such a traumatic situation. There was a crisis that went on for a good 5 to 6 years, rushing to be able to get these kids placed, but also the concern to make sure that everybody's there so that it can be done right. Okay, I kind of went off in left field here, but the point of the matter is INSEAD is not grasping at straws when they say that a person violently assaulted with high levels of electricity may react violently or feel a need to escape the violence. Because those are very natural human things that we do as self preservation. Let's continue to read, shall we? Also included were numerous reports of students who have incurred physical injuries. This is where those ER medical records became absolutely crucial. Burns, red marks on their skin. I'm going to mention all the things that the FDA is not going to put in here, like 3rd and 2nd degree burns, 2-month long catatonia, loss of feeling where the electrodes were attached to the muscles. Yeah, as a result of being shocked, for whom parents and students themselves have reported short term and long term trauma effects as a result of the use of such devices or watching other students being shocked. Loss of hair, loss of appetite, suicidal ideation. They are trapped in a culture of absolute barbaric cruelty. Whether it is happening to them directly or whether it's happening to someone right next to them. These kids, every single second moment of their lives trapped in this horrific place, is absolutely inundated with violence, cruelty, and barbarity. That is their lives. It is a absolute culture of abuse, torture, and fear. Okay? Part of what develops a culture of fear is your reaction to another individual next to you also being horrifically abused. And actually, that's a twofold thing. First of all, for those of us who actually do have sympathy for our fellow human beings, it is absolutely traumatic to see one of your fellow neurodivergents collapsing on the floor, frothing at the mouth because of these insane bastards. It also acts as a threat, a reminder of what will happen to you if you fall out of line, out of their ideal fanfic version of normal. We're going to close out on that, folks. We don't get very many views on this channel. The few we do get do tend to get removed from time to time, so you know the drill, folks. Please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the comments. I appreciate your time. As always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. I'll see you in a few minutes.